Hi everyone, this is Travels with an Archaeologist. I'm the archaeologist, now let's get into the travels. So today we're in Knossos, on the island of Crete, just outside the city of Heraklion. That's in modern Greece. It's also typically the home of the Minoans, who are Europe's oldest civilization. And long-time viewers will already know this, but to new viewers you should know that the Minoans are one of the groups that I specialized in as part of my studies in the Bronze Age Aegean. And this is good because there's a lot of myths about who the Minoans were, and I'm not going to lie, a lot of it is the fault of past archaeology. And everything I'm going to tell you today are things that almost all modern archaeologists, including experts like myself, do agree on. But it's not going to match what you may have been told about the Minoans, and you can bet that I am going to discuss why that is. But first, let's familiarize ourselves with who the Minoans were. The Minoans were Europe's oldest civilization, but the stuff I'm going to show you in this video is from their golden age in the Middle Bronze Age. They wrote in a script known as Linear A. Now, you may or may not be aware of Linear B, the Mycenaean script, which is quite close to Greek, but this is not the case with Linear A, or at least it doesn't seem to be. Linear A is an older script, and as of yet has not been successfully translated. This means we don't actually know what the Minoans called themselves. Rather, they are named after King Minos, the king of Crete from classical legend, who you definitely know, from the Labyrinth and the Minotaur. What is clear is that the Minoans were the original masters of the Mediterranean, trading goods along age-old sea routes in the days before the Phoenicians, the Greeks, or Venice. They had some pretty impressive architecture and art, and there are records of them going as far afield as Egypt. They had colonies set up in the Middle Bronze Age across the Aegean Islands. Now, the Minoans fell into decline around 1400 to 1450 BCE, and they were slowly absorbed into their Mycenaean counterparts from the mainland. But how did this happen? Well, oddly enough, that is where we get into true mythology. Now, Minoans are often associated with Atlantis. If you haven't heard of Atlantis, firstly, what rock have you been living under, and can I join you in this happy conspiracy-free world? But, briefly, Atlantis is a lost city of Greek myth described by Plato but expanded upon by later writers and even in the modern world into an entire lost continent of highly advanced civilizations. Now, the original myth, it is a highly advanced society until it angered the gods and then was lost beneath the sea to a great cataclysm. Now, this does seem fit with the Minoans pretty well. And while the Atlantean myth is a little exaggerated, the bare bones of an advanced civilization disappearing without a trace has often been seen as true by many archaeologists, and Minoans are the most likely culprits. If this was the case, where is the original Atlantis? Well, if you've ever toured around the Aegean islands of Greece, odds are good you've already seen it, and you didn't even realize it. This is Santorini. Famed for its beautiful blue domes, Santorini was in fact the site of the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri, and it was Akrotiri in particular which is believed to be the source of the Atlantis myth, if indeed there is a source to be found, if we consider the myth grounded in fact at all. Now, Santorini today lies on the crater of an old volcano that used to be named Thera, and Thera erupted in a big way during the Bronze Age. It coated the whole island in ash and caused a destructive tsunami that spread throughout the Aegean. This smashed along Knossos' harbor, destroying the ships. The Minoans were never quite able to recover after that, and it weakened them enough that the Mycenaeans, a more warlike Peloponnesian people, were able to conquer them and take over their trading systems. This volcanic eruption seems to even be depicted in Akrotiri, with people and animals fleeing from a wave of lava, and it would certainly explain how Atlantis was pulled into the sea by the wrath of the gods, never to rise again. Neat little explanation, right? But here's the problem. It's wrong. See, we used to think that Thera erupted around the 1450 BCE mark, which would give a nice tidy little timeline to the fall and the Minoan failure to recover as a reason for their conquest by the Mycenaeans. But in fact, an analysis of Thera's ash shows that the eruption actually took place about 1630 to 1650 BCE, which is 1 to 2 centuries before they should be in decline. So that means exactly what happened to the Minoans, and by extension Atlantis, is once again open for debate. But to return to solid fact, away from mythology and speculation, I want to go over the interpretation of Minoan material culture through the man who discovered it, the one put forward by Arthur Evans. Evans is wrong, and I'm going to go over why he's wrong, but first I want to present you with his argument, and I want to present it in good faith and his reasonings behind it. According to Evans, Minoan artwork shows males are painted darker colors and females are painted lighter colors. Now, he reasoned this is the case because this follows the Egyptian artistic theme, because the Minoans were refugees from northern Egypt. Evans claimed they were likely a peaceful race, reasoned by the fact that their bases do not have walls, and again this much is true. No city on Crete, except perhaps Malea from the known era, seemed to have any fortifications at all, and likewise there were no weapons. His artistic reconstructions also show the Minoans had an affinity for dolphins and reeds, and his palace shows open columns in very Near Eastern styles. This throne room here is called the oldest throne in Europe, because this is where the king sat. The Minoans were likely matriarchal, known for worshipping the snake goddess, and this can be proven in their artistic depictions. Depictions that are called frescoes in Knossos, by the way, even though they are not the technical definition of what you would usually call a fresco. And this peaceful lifestyle continued until the eruption of Thera weakened them, and the Mycenaeans, a far more violent and warlike race, emerged from the mainland and put an end to them. But the issue with this narrative is that it just isn't right either. See, Evans is a deeply problematic figure in modern archaeology, but he tends to survive criticism thanks to his high-class upbringing and a generous amount of funding donated to the Ashmolean Museum, which he also happened to curate and where a lot of Knossos' material culture can still be seen. But he was all show and no substance. Indeed, we see him making clumsy mistakes and even purposeful errors which the archaeologists of the time would have known better than to do. So take this reconstruction of Knossos. See the problem here? Yup, that's Evans. How did he think this was a continuation of this? And these reeds here, they originally looked like this, but Evans changed them because he felt the Minoans would have liked them better. Seriously. And it's important to note that you'll probably find many of his explanations shoehorned in or twisted to make him right rather than trying to rethink his hypothesis. And this isn't me being biased against Evans. This was legitimately his way of thinking. The only reason we know anything of value from Knossos was thanks to this man, Duncan Mackenzie, who, unlike Evans, was a real archaeologist. He accompanied Evans on his original excavations of Knossos and made numerous corrections to Evans' notes, including keeping his own for good measure. Mackenzie was the one who made the stratigraphic profile of Knossos and instituted a timeline, and it led him and Evans to clash, with Evans often using Mackenzie as a scapegoat. There's actually a bit of side drama to this, but it's not really the topic of this video. Now, let's get into why Evans was wrong in his interpretations. While the Egyptians did indeed use light colors for females and dark colors for males, there is one key issue that Evans misses in this interpretation, and you're going to have to stay with me. It's really technical. It's going to be really hard to follow me here. We're going to get really complicated, so let's really dive into it. The one key thing Evans missed is Crete is not Egypt. But you're right, I need to offer more evidence than that, so let's break down his reconstructions. This looks pretty good, right? Surely this depicts a peaceful matriarchal society just as Evans portrayed, with this woman in the center receiving offerings from her male servants. There's a problem though. Only this strip down here is original. You can see the chunks of original fresco in this photo. That means this whole swathe of reconstruction comes right out of Evans' imagination. Okay, archaeologist, okay, I hear you saying that's fair, but that's just one fresco. And that's fair enough. So, what else is there that proves him wrong? Well, this does. This is known as the bull fresco, and we're going to spend a bit of time on this one. You can again see the bits of real fresco in these areas. This reconstruction, then, actually looks like a pretty safe one. But do you notice the problem? The figures, in addition to being white, are also unmistakably male. Now, there are some bends in logic to try and explain this, among them that perhaps white is used for both females and children, and that this was a coming-of-age ritual where a boy becomes a man. And this one is not totally disproven. But, the fact is we are working backwards from Evans' assumptions rather than working forwards from a lot of our evidence. Furthermore, Egyptian art portrays front-facing bodies with sideways heads, while Minoan art seems to try for a more realistic side-profile style, a fact that Evans glosses over. They also lack the Egyptian style of monumental art. Now, having said that, Evans did not entirely screw over the site. This fresco is also a pretty safe reconstruction, as is this one. The trick is to look for the bulges of original beneath the reapplied paint. And while its function as a palace isn't completely confirmed, I actually do think interpreting it as a palace or government center is a safe guess, as do most experts. This is a building of high importance in the wider Minoan world, and the presence of grain pits and rich decorations alongside domestic living quarters does suggest that this was a rich building used for both domestic and official function. The actual ground floor reconstruction of Knossos is also fairly good. The palace still has high walls and wide courtyards, and a lot of original work survives. It was built in 1700 BCE following an earthquake, with the western end, that's the end you enter from, seeming to be the oldest section of it. But Evans' interpretations of these rooms are, as you can probably guess, also problematic. Now, take this room. Do you remember it? Supposedly Europe's oldest throne. Now, Evans labeled it as a throne room for a queen or a high priestess, but excavations from other Minoan palaces would suggest that this might just be a bathing area. You can see that the palace of Knossos really was a rival in majesty to the larger empires of the East, but above the ground floor things get tricky, as Evans was all about digging and not a lot about note-taking. And they did have the means to excavate correctly to get a clearer picture of the roof or potential upper floors at the time. He just didn't do it. And we can't even go back to try and fix his work because a lot of this reconstruction was built with concrete, ruining the original foundations. As for them being a peaceful matriarchal society, again, there is simply no evidence for it. Now yes, while this figure probably did have a religious or spiritual function, this is not really conclusive that they were a matriarchal society. This would be like seeing a poster of the Virgin Mary and assuming that the medieval Catholic Church was matriarchal, and I don't think anybody is going to argue that. Now, none of this is to say that Evans is necessarily wrong in all of his interpretations. It's not even saying that the Minoans were not matriarchal, it is just saying that the evidence that Evans put forward is not actual evidence of it. There is very little determination to say much of substance of the Minoans, sadly, especially the way Evans has presented them, and again, this isn't me necessarily saying he's wrong, it's just me saying that he offered no concrete evidence of many of his conclusions. The bull actually seems to be far more important to the Minoans based on their material culture, and this isn't too surprising. We see bulls being worshipped and used in holy areas across the eastern Mediterranean at this time. The narrative that they found more significance in cattle fits in far better with what we know of regional beliefs of the time and with what we know of what later civilizations would associate with the island. Whatever their beliefs, they seemed to take place on peak sanctuaries which, as the name suggests, were built on the tops of peaks. In addition, there is nothing to suggest that these people were refugees from northern Egypt. Indeed, the more evidence we uncover from other Minoan sites, the more obvious it is that they do have a local origin on Crete. The site of Knossos itself seems to have been inhabited by a sedentary people who were farming and making pottery from at least 7000 BCE, and the Minoans were famed for their pottery. Take a look at some of these ones, these nice flowing art styles. So, Evans was a pretty incompetent archaeologist even for his time, and although he is credited with discovering Knossos, it actually had some early exploratory work done by this man in 1878 with a name that, I'm sorry to the Greek viewers, I'm just not going to be able to pronounce that, so I'm not even going to try. He just wasn't able to excavate very far because Crete was still under Ottoman control. Now it is true that most Minoan sites seem not to have walls with the possible exception of Malia, but this doesn't imply a passive nature. After all, Sparta also had no walls, and they were famously militaristic. Also, the vast majority of Minoan sites are on islands. Many of these islands are quite small, and you could make the argument that the sea was their wall, especially as their navy would have been unparalleled in their own waters. They are known to have flowing artwork and great metalwork, and we actually have found weapons from them. We do see evidence for a state-level society built on trading and on the sea. And yet, despite these glaring issues, Evans is still adored in Heracleion. It is interesting to see, actually, that someone who so badly screwed up the site and stole the artifacts to be celebrated here, yet he is in a way that would make Lord Elgin blush. And why is this? Well, truthfully, it's because he brought Crete and Knossos to the world's attention. The Minoans only stick out in the public eye because of Evans, and his reconstruction, however problematic it is still the second most visited tourist site in all of Greece. He genuinely did a lot to promote the Minoans, and while he promoted them under his vision, that vision still draws a crowd. However, the Minoans were eventually subsumed into the Mycenaean culture during the 15th century BCE. And was this an actual violent conquest as Evans suggested, or was it a mix of factors that we can't really determine from the archaeological record? Well, tune into my Mycenaean video later where I'm going to talk about that. But if you've been paying attention, you probably already know what the answer is going to be. The Minoans are Europe's oldest civilization and one we know remarkably little about despite their visibility on the archaeological record. And regardless of the problems with Knossos' reconstruction, you should still definitely visit. And if you do want to see some original palace complexes without the reconstruction, do head to Malia, Phaistos, or Kato-Zakro, which are also excavated Minoan palatial complexes. Crete is an amazing island, and there's still a lot at Knossos that's worth seeing, and there's a lot in Heracleion itself that's worth seeing. Especially now that you've seen this video and you can hopefully see it with a critical eye. Take a walk through the streets of what could have been Atlantis and marvel at how these people springing up on this island were able to build a civilization that rivaled the powers of Egypt and Mesopotamia and establish the world's first pan-Mediterranean trade network. That's all for today. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Please do like this video and subscribe, and a link to my Patreon is in the description below. If you do have a site you'd like me to cover, do feel free to leave a comment and I'll see what I can dig up. Anyway, until next time, I'm the Archaeologist, and this has been The Travels. Alright, so I do want to give a quick thanks to you viewers, because my last archaeology video on Head Smashed In also smashed records. Not only did I break 1,000 views, I did that in 4 days. Now, as you know, I am a growing channel. I'm pretty much a one-man operation doing this on my own and in my free time, so I really do appreciate that my passion project is getting this attention. So yeah, thank you. Keep watching, please do subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.